White people were enslaved too. Why is it that only black slavery seems to be taught in schools? History often overlooks the fact that white people were also enslaved, especially in North Africa. Pirates known as the Barbary pirates would raid European towns and villages, particularly around the Mediterranean. This went on until the 1840s, which is close to the time when slavery was abolished in America. These pirates, primarily from North Africa, would capture Europeans and take them to black nations in Africa. There, these white slaves were treated just as horrifically as the slaves in America. Men were often castrated and forced to work under brutal conditions, not on plantations like in the U.S., but in quarries where many were worked to death. Even more harrowing is the fate of many European women who were taken as sex slaves by their African captors. This dark and violent chapter of history saw white women being exploited and abused by their African masters, yet this aspect of slavery seems to have faded from mainstream historical narratives. Why is this era of white slavery in Africa rarely discussed in classrooms today? It's a part of history that deserves to be remembered just as much as any other form of slavery. Yet it has been largely forgotten or overlooked.
White man argues why black people were freed from slavery.
He had no choice.
Do you understand?
You know why we got free? Black people want to know why we got civil rights and why we got free. We got free out of slavery because white men wanted to keep their money. That's why we got free.
600,000 white men went to go fucking die for you?
They didn't die for me.
Right.
And they didn't die for my forepaw. They died for Abraham Lincoln, who would have never freed them slaves. You understand? Listen. And let me tell you something. It's a good democratic talking point. You got an excellent democratic talking point. But the truth of the matter is, you white people only conquer for yourself. You don't never conquer for us. I'm not saying you are. I'm not saying you are. I believe you are a staunch Republican. But I think that you are giving credence to those 600,000 men when Abraham Lincoln had no choice.
So wait, if I decided right now, civil liberties go, somebody, fucking the trans community, they're fucking getting discriminated against, and I lay my fucking life down because I care about them, I'm doing it for fucking Joe Biden?
No, you're doing it, then you are doing it for them.
Oh,
but the soldiers did not do it for us. The soldiers, listen, but you wasn't in that war. You wasn't even alive back then. And listen, and if you read the letters, of those soldiers, do you know how many Irishmen revolted against having to go to war in that war? They had to round up Irishmen in the bars by the hundreds. You know why? Because they did not want to fight to free black people. They didn't want to believe the propaganda. And guess what? Lincoln forced them to fight. You know why he forced them to fight? Because he did not. You know why he didn't want to? You know why he did it? He did it because he wanted to make sure that he won the South over. He didn't give a damn about the slaves, man. And this is the thing that the South knew that the North did not know. The South knew that these slaves was our biggest economic structure. Slaves were the biggest economic weapon that white people had in the South. And Abraham Lincoln knew it, and Abraham Lincoln's generals knew it, and they came together and said, we will go to war, and if we have to, we will free the slaves so that the slaves can help us fight the South. And guess what? Once they won that war, they destroyed us as a people. Right or wrong, we became sharecroppers. We starved in the South. Why did black families come to the North? Why did black families come to Chicago and New York and Boston and Baltimore and Washington, D.C.? They came to the North because they were starving in the South after the Civil War. After the Civil War, those Southerners starved, burnt down, raped. Are you kidding? The Civil War.
Welcome back to this channel, and I hope you are all doing good. Today's discussion is based on white people who are saying that they were also enslaved, but only black slavery is taught in schools. So let's get into these clips. I'll be coming back with more commentaries because one of the first things we have to recognize is that slavery has existed in many forms throughout human history. So let's get into the clips. I'll be back with more commentaries. Stay tuned.
The problem that we have in white America is that most white people, when they hear about white racism, most white people say, man, that's not me. I never discriminated against anybody. Never did. In their sense of what discrimination means or what racism is, they may be right. But they sit residing in a system from which they take full benefit, a system that defines them in and defines black people out. We are going to have to face the fact that we are not a community. A community is where a lot of people develop mutually beneficial relationships with each other. And our racist institutions and the political boundaries of our cities define black people out of the community. White people sit in their suburban homes and watch your television programs and hear about all of these laws that are being passed. Many of them are beginning to wonder, what is it with those colored people out there? Why are they so upset? All this wonderful stuff that we're doing for them. But we aren't focusing on the black man living on the block. He lives in a two-flat on that block, and he knows what the circumstance on that block was 10 years ago, and he knows what it is today, and he too has heard about all of those programs and laws being passed. But the hard fact of the matter is that things are not changing for him. It's no wonder that the white population and the black population are pitted against each other when the black man knows that the change is not coming and the white man thinks that major efforts are being undertaken when they are not. So I don't think anybody should be surprised when one sees the black people in an open attack on the system, because I suspect that they don't see that there is any other realistic alternative.
So my 5-year-old brought home a book today from her Texas public school library entitled African Americans in the Colonies. Let me hit you with some highlights. The first black people in Jamestown were a group of Africans from Barbados. They were brought there by Dutch traders, and Englishman John Rolfe bought them. The blacks probably spoke English, and like English indentured servants, might have eventually earned their freedom. Antonio, a Negro, arrived in Jamestown in 1621. He was owned by the Bennett family, who praised his hard work and loyalty. Antonio married a black woman named Mary, eventually earned his and his family's freedom. He became a landowner and changed his name to Anthony Johnson. In the early days of Jamestown, settlers didn't use words like white or black to describe themselves. They would refer themselves or each other as English, Christian, or perhaps servants, who could be either white or black. Anthony Johnson enjoyed the same rights, freedom, and respect as any white servant who became successful by working hard. But as tobacco farms became bigger, the need for laborers grew, and the amount of English people willing to come to America as indentured servants was shrinking. So they turned to slavery. Slavery was not new to the people from Africa, where warring tribes often turned prisoners into slaves. In Africa, slaves lived and worked with the family who owned them. Slaves were considered unequal, but they were treated like other family members. This is similar to the experiences of early slaves in America, who worked alongside their white owners and probably slept in the same house. The first Africans in North America spent time among the Europeans. They could speak English and often converted to Christianity. They sometimes won their freedoms by claiming that as Christians they deserved it, or they bought their freedom with the money they earned in their free time. By the mid-1600s, 1 in 5 black people in North America was free. But then the laws regarding slavery became stricter. African slaves entered Carolina the same way as the other colonies from the West Indies. They usually spoke English and they enjoyed some privileges in their life of hard work, but these privileges did not last long in Carolina. These farms gave way to plantations, and slaves were brought directly from Africa to the busy slave ports of Charlestown and the Chesapeake Bay. As the black population of the colonies grew, white lawmakers made it harder for Africans to prosper. Once, a slave like Anthony Johnson could earn his freedom and live a good life if he worked hard. Now, the land he knew was vanishing. Now, Africans like John Punch were seen just as one way, permanent slaves, property of their owners. This chapter is called Recreating Africa in America. That's how we're describing slavery. We're just recreating Africa because, as you know, 11-year-old Odula Equino was kidnapped from their African home by black slave traders. He was heartbroken when he was separated, and he was eventually sold to some white slave traders, where he saw white slave traders for the first time. Life was difficult for slaves who came directly from Africa because they didn't speak English. They worked long hours. They had few chances to learn other skills besides farming. White people, especially in the South, became more fearful of Africans as their numbers grew. Whites used fear and sometimes severe punishment to control black slaves. Conditions slowly began to improve as the next generation of slaves demanded more rights. Family life was important to the Africans. The white slave owners learned that keeping families together meant fewer slaves would run away. Slaves wanted more free time. For a while, plantation slaves worked 7 days a week. Then they were given Sundays, the traditional day of rest, off from work. Slaves again began growing vegetables or raising chickens to sell and hired themselves out to non-slave owners after finishing their plantation work. By earning extra money, slave parents could improve the way their families ate and lived. If you're worried about the black boy we read about a moment ago with the black slave traders, don't worry. He grew tall and strong, and after a long, hard day's work, he worked even more to save money to purchase his freedom. When one of his owners abused him, he complained to the Connecticut Justice of the Peace. The man apologized, but said in his defense there were no laws to protect slaves. Finally, at age 36, he bought his freedom from his master. Slave owners often lived in fear of rebellions or uprising against them. And then they talk about one that happened where a band of 20 slaves led by a man named Jemmy left their owners and headed south, where they killed more than 20 white people that day. The cause of liberty inspired many white Americans to think harder about the morality of slavery. Many decided that human beings owning other human beings was wrong. Thousands of Africans were freed by their owners after the war ended. Even George Washington freed his slaves. At the end of the 1700s, the northern states were abolishing slavery. Some southern states made it easier for slave owners to free their slaves. It would take the long and bloody Civil War to completely abolish slavery in the United States, and that is the end.
You know what? Different civilizations, different empires, and kingdoms practiced systems of slavery that affected people from many ethnic and cultural backgrounds. So when some people say that white people were also enslaved at different points in history, they are referring to historical examples in places such as Europe, the Mediterranean, and parts of the Middle East, and they're also talking about North Africa. You know, historians generally agree that these events did happen. However, many educators explain that the reason the transatlantic slave trade receives significant attention in schools, particularly in countries like the United States, is because of its enormous impact on the nation's history. Millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic, and the institution of racial slavery shaped laws, politics, economics, and social structures for generations. And its legacy continues to influence discussions about race and inequality today. So this does not necessarily mean that other historical forms of slavery are unimportant. In fact, many historians are encouraging teaching a broader history of slavery so that students understand it as a global phenomenon. You know, learning about different forms of slavery can provide valuable context while still recognizing the unique characteristics and long-lasting consequences of the transatlantic slave trade. And another question often raised is whether history classes should expand their curriculum. Some people believe that schools should spend more time discussing slavery in ancient civilizations, the enslavement of Europeans by various empires, forced labor in different regions of the world, and modern forms of human trafficking. Others are arguing that schools already have limited classroom time and therefore prioritize topics that had the greatest influence on their own country's development. And this debate reminds us that history education will often involve deciding what to emphasize rather than claiming that other events never happened. Different countries also teach history differently. What students learn in one nation may differ considerably from what students study elsewhere because educational systems often focus on their own historical experiences. It's also worth remembering that discussions about history can become more productive when people avoid treating them as competitions over who suffered more. Acknowledging one group's suffering does not require denying another group's experiences. And multiple historical tragedies can all be important and worthy of study. History is most useful when it helps us understand the present. And studying slavery in its different forms can reveal how power, economics, conflict, and prejudice have affected societies across centuries. It can also encourage critical thinking about freedom, about human rights, and the value of treating every person with dignity. And as viewers, let's just always say that it's helpful to ask questions such as, what evidence supports a particular claim? What do professional historians say? How do different sources describe the same event? And these questions lead to a more informed understanding than relying solely on headlines or social media discussions. Ultimately, expanding historical knowledge does not have to diminish anyone else's story. Learning more about global history can complement, not replace, the study of the transatlantic slave trade and its enduring impact. This a more complete understanding of history benefits everyone by providing greater context and encouraging thoughtful discussion rather than division. So I'd just love to hear your perspective. Do you think schools should broaden their coverage of slavery around the world while continuing to teach the history of their transatlantic slave trade in depth? Just share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. And if you enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future conversations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Of course, all credit belongs to the original creators of the video.